Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Shakayla Alvarenga. I am the Director of Public Programs here at the Mob Museum. Thank you so much for being here and joining us for this program. Each year, the Mob Museum recognizes Black History Month to honor the many achievements of African Americans and those who continue to fight for civil rights. It's a pleasure to share this stage with such esteemed guests. Before we begin, I would like to say a special thank you to the Clark County Black Caucus for all of their help in setting up this program. And I would also like to invite Angel Williams from NV Energy Foundation to the podium for a brief moment as our sponsor for this event too.
Thank you, Shakayla. At NV Energy, we are working together to build a more diverse and equitable and inclusive workforce. We want to enhance the lives of our employees, but we also want to deliver for our customers. So at NV Energy and our foundation, we think about how do we strengthen our communities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do we ensure that we are positioning ourselves to be the best energy company to serve our customers in delivering that affordable and reliable clean energy. The NV Energy Foundation has enjoyed a really long partnership with the Mob Museum, and we've been a proud partner of the Community Safety Forums. And I've always been impressed with all of the programming that the museum has done, but when they started their diversity and inclusion programming last year, I was particularly impressed. And I knew that it fit perfectly with the priorities of the NV Energy Foundation. The NV Energy Foundation is proud to sponsor this year's 2022 programming for diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Mob Museum. And our support goes far beyond even just that of the Mob Museum. I'm proud to share that in 2021, NV Energy, our foundation, and our employees contributed nearly $5.4 million to support our community. And $5 million of that was invested in organizations serving diverse communities. 2021 also marked the launch of Beauty, which is our new employee resource group at NV Energy. It stands for Black Employees and Allies United to Inspire Equity. And we also launched Pride Connection. It's our employee resource group for our LGBTQ+ employees and their allies. And then just today, we were very excited to launch Inspiration, and that's our employee resource group serving our AAPI employees and their allies. I couldn't be prouder of the progress that NV Energy has made in establishing those employee resource groups and the community investments that we've made. I think that it's steps on that journey that we're making towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's a journey that only happens, I think, with thoughtful consideration and intention, and also about having courageous conversations like we're about to hear tonight. So to the museum and the team that put this program together, thank you. And to the audience, thank you for being here tonight. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Angel. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for tonight's program, Leaders in Law Celebrating Nevada's Black Legal Trailblazers. Brian Scott was unanimously ratified by the Las Vegas City Council on June 17, 2020, as the first African-American city attorney for Las Vegas in the city's 119-year history. Scott started working for the Las Vegas City Attorney's Office in 1996 and specializes in land use, zoning, and planning. He was the assistant city attorney for 15 years prior to his promotion. Scott is the first African-American president of the Clark County Law Foundation, the first African-American president of the Clark County Bar Association, and the first African-American president of the State Bar of Nevada. In June 2021, Scott was honored by the State Bar of Nevada with the naming and awarding of the inaugural Brian K. Scott Trailblazer Award. Johnnie Rollinson was appointed by former President Bill Clinton in the U.S. District Court for the District of Nevada in 1998 and then to the Ninth Circuit in 2000. Prior to her appointments to the federal bench, Judge Rollinson spent her entire legal career in Las Vegas, first in private practice, then as a staff attorney for Nevada Legal Services, and then in the Las Vegas District Attorney's Office, where she served for 18 years, ultimately as the Assistant District Attorney. She earned her Juris Doctorate from University of the Pacific McGeorge School of Law in 1979. She is the first African-American woman to sit on the Ninth Circuit. She is also the first female judge to sit on the U.S. District Court in Nevada. And what we'll do is I know all of these are such great accomplishments, and we'll save our claps for the end, okay? Michael Douglas was appointed to the Nevada Supreme Court in March 2004, and thereafter retained and twice reelected. Justice Douglas served as Chief Justice in 2011 and 2018. Justice Douglas was the first African-American justice in Nevada history. His Nevada career began as an attorney with Nevada Legal Services in 1982. 2 years later, he was hired by the Clark County District Attorney's Office and served in the Civil Division until 1995. In 1996, he was appointed to the 8th Judicial District Court bench, and he took this office and was retained in an election later that year, serving until his appointment to the Supreme Court. On the district court, he served as chief judge and business court judge, and also served on district court committees and Supreme Court commissions. And Judge Tim Williams. We'll get it eventually. Judge Tim Williams graduated from Indiana University with a bachelor's degree in business. He received his Juris Doctorate from Ohio Northern University. Prior to taking the bench, Judge Williams has 20 years of complex civil litigation experience. He is the former president of the Nevada Trial Lawyers Association and former president of the Las Vegas chapter of the National Bar Association. As a lawyer, Judge Williams obtained an AV ranking in Martindale-Hubbell for his legal ability and high ethical standards. In addition to his commitment to the law, Judge Williams has received United States congressional recognition for community service. He was sworn in on April 24th, 2006. Please give all of our panelists a round of applause. So I'd like to spend the first few minutes of this program giving each of you an opportunity to talk more about your career and your time here in Las Vegas. So Brian Scott, we will start with you. So I read an article that you wrote last year about Nevada African American attorney firsts, and in it you touched upon the history of the legal profession in Nevada and the racial impediments that were put in place to prevent African Americans from practicing law in this state. And so for those who don't know, the gentleman here on our PowerPoint, Mr. Charles Keller, can you talk about his legacy?
I can. Thank you, Shakayla. And thank you all for being here tonight. It was my pleasure in 2021 to author a couple of articles for the Nevada Lawyer magazine. One was for the February Black History Month edition called Black History Month, and then where I detailed all of the Nevada firsts, African American firsts in our state. And, you know, just as Judge Rollinson probably warned me, I forgot a couple people. And so I wound up in the April edition adding additional lawyers who were African-American first from Northern Nevada. You know, we down here in Southern Nevada sometimes get a little bit entrenched in our own territory that we forget our brother and sister up north. So Charles Keller, the more research I do about him and hear about him, the more I'm so impressed by him, and I wish that I could have met him. I know Dr. Clayton White's in the audience. I know she will probably correct me on some of these facts if I get them wrong, but Charles Keller was a gentleman who was a lawyer in New York City, a very prominent lawyer. In some of the articles I read, he said he was making up to $1 million a year in his real estate holdings as well as being a lawyer. Thurgood Marshall recruited him to come to Nevada, as he did with other African-American attorneys in New York, to go to states where there weren't any African-Americans practicing law. He must have been a great talker, because he somehow convinced Mr. Keller to come to Nevada and sit for the Nevada bar. He took the bar in Reno. There's a story that talks about when the hotel saw that he was an African American, they didn't allow him to stay in the hotel, so he wound up spending 2 days in the Reno airport as he took the Nevada bar. When the scores came out, he was surprised that his name wasn't on the list. He had gotten one of the highest scores ever recorded at that time, and they thought he cheated. And so they refused to allow him to be licensed in the State Bar of Nevada. This was in 1961, I believe. He then had to go through a series of character and fitness meetings with the State Bar of Nevada, where they believed that because he was being difficult, they didn't believe that he would be a good lawyer, nor would he uphold the tenets of law. So in that sense, they tried to prevent him from practicing. And he could have easily gone back to New York, regained his life, and not missed a beat. He instead stayed, sued the State Bar of Nevada, sued the Board of Bar Examiners, wound up winning, and he really should have been the first African-American lawyer in Nevada. Unfortunately, when he was fighting the State Bar of Nevada, Earl White, as well as Robert Reed, were also recruited from Howard University, came and they took the bar, passed the bar, and he finally was barred 4 years after he actually took the exam. And so it's a shame that he has to have that asterisk by his name in terms of not being the first, but he truly was the first African-American lawyer in Nevada.
Thank you.
And I will add one point.
Yeah.
I knew Mr. Keller very well.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yes, he was one of my clients.
Oh, I didn't know that.
As a civil litigator, and they weren't really any significant legal issues, small contract matters, but it was probably about 1986, 1987, Mr. Keller retained me. And what I really enjoyed about that was just having conversations with him about his time here in Las Vegas and some of the trials and tribulations he had to undergo. But he was a really nice man, was a talker.
And he lived until 93. I think he passed away in 2002.
Absolutely.
He was born in 1909, so he lived quite a long life.
So I did know him. But
Thank you. Thank you for that insight.
yeah.
And Mr. Scott, I know that your mother played a vital role in your career. Can you tell us more about her?
Okay, Shaquille, you're going to get the tears rolling now.
It's time.
I've been very fortunate to have a lot of role models in my life. Justice Douglas, when I first came on, Don Campbell, who was my first boss, as well as Dr. William Sullivan from UNLV. But my mom was my very first and ultimate role model. It's funny, she grew up in segregated Texas in 1935, and this is her diploma from Hopewell Colored High School in Round Rock, Texas from 1952. So this hangs in my very nice office, corner office in City Hall, amongst all my other diplomas and degrees and awards and accolades. And so she was a custodian at Care Unit Hospital. She was a daycare worker. She worked at Wesley United Methodist Church as a daycare manager for years and years. She put me through law school herself, a single mother. My brother was a Metro police officer for 29 years. There were 4 of us, and she, by herself, put us through high school, college, and was a tremendous role model, not just from her words, but from her deeds and actions. And that's the thing she instilled in us, that education was the most important, even though she went to, again, a segregated high school and was only educated at the high school level. She knew that this was our way to get ahead. And so in all I do, and even when I became bar president and everything else, you'll see that, I'm a mama's boy, so I'll admit it. So, but I do thank her because of the fact of her sacrifices and what she did for us, again, through her deeds and through her actions and through her words and her faith in us and in God, got us through, and that was my biggest role model. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My last question for you. Being a government attorney comes with its own unique set of challenges and circumstances. So what are those challenges, and how do you plan to navigate it in this position?
Thank you for that question. I've been a government lawyer for 25 years, since 1996. I've been through 4 mayors and possibly, I think, 25 council members, all with different political aspirations, all with different ideologies, all with different things that they believe that are the best interests of the city. And for me, the biggest thing was gaining their trust and being able to guide them legally and ethically through the process. As you know, when you have 7 individuals, which all have, again, different ideologies sometimes and different ways of trying to run the city, my goal as the attorney is not to choose sides, but to be able to navigate those political waves and try my best to guide them in what's the best interest of the city. So I've been successful. I still have a job at this point, so I think I've been fairly successful in doing that these years, and I hope to do it for a little while longer. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Now, as I mentioned before, Judge Johnnie Rollinson is the first African-American woman to sit on the Ninth Circuit. This photo on the left was taken in Kannapolis, North Carolina. Ms. Rollinson was part of the first fully integrated graduation class there. What was your school experience like leading up to graduation?
Thank you, Shakayla. Before I answer that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank my handsome son who escorted me tonight. And I have to always say that if it were not for my family, much like Ryan with his mother, if it were not for my family, I would not have been able to accomplish the many things that I've been blessed to accomplish. My beautiful daughters, Monica and Tracy, are watching on live stream. And of course, my husband of 40 years was also instrumental in supporting me and encouraging me and just helping me fly. So I always give credit to my family for everything I've accomplished, because I could not have accomplished anything without their support and encouragement. All of the success I have is their success as well, because they were a part of it from the beginning to the end. So to answer the question about growing up in the segregated South and integrating a school, it's really interesting because we all in law school studied Brown versus Board of Education, but I lived Brown versus Board of Education. And I remember distinctly when the decision was made that we had to integrate the school. And a lot of people are of the impression that the African American kids were jumping to go to integrated schools, but we were not. We did not want to leave our schools. I think that we got really good educations at our school. We were not given equal materials, and the teachers were not paid the same, but the teachers lived in our community. They went to church with us. They were invested in our success. So it was a real culture shock when we were ripped from our communities to go into an environment that we were not used to. The Caucasian children were not used to interacting with us. We were not used to interacting with them. You have to realize we had totally separate existence, separate neighborhoods, separate churches, separate theaters, separate swimming pools. Everything was totally separate. And so once Brown versus Board of Education came down, the first plan was to have voluntary integration, so that African American kids were given the opportunity to go to school with Caucasian children for the first time. The problem was not many of the African American kids were willing to leave our school to go there. So the next thing that happened was our school was closed. And I remember vividly, they had a meeting, and the parents from our community went and protested vociferously against them closing our school. And my father was one of the main advocates who wanted our school to remain. We had a lot of traditions, we had a lot of culture there. Our teachers were invested in their positions there, and people were succeeding. The children were going to college, they were becoming business people and professionals, and we did not want to change our school. But the school board decided that the African American school would be closed and everyone would have to go to the Caucasian school. And it was traumatic for us to go there. In retrospect, I think probably the architects of desegregation did not consider the fact that the burden of desegregating the school was placed upon children. And there was no period of transition, no psychological training, getting to know each other. We were just thrust into an environment where we didn't want to be, and the people who were there didn't want us to be there. And it was difficult. It was really difficult for us to be there. We were called names. Most of the African American students were put into a vocational track. I was one of the few African American students who was in a college track. And that was challenging because when we'd have discussions at that time, the Black Power movement was coming into being, and we would have discussions about Black Power, and some of the Caucasian children would talk about how Black people should go back to Africa and swing on trees. And I had the audacity to challenge that notion and say that, there were African civilizations way before there were European civilizations, and for that, the teacher put into my file that I was a racist. Go figure. But I think even then I was looking toward opening doors for other people, because I was recruited to become the first African American cheerleader there, and I did that. And I also became one of the first members of the Honor Society. And so I feel like even then I was being groomed to open doors for other people. And it was a difficult thing to do, but I'm very glad that I did it. And I think that my journey through segregation has really given me a sensibility to some of the issues that come before me on the court. So I can't say that I regretted doing that, but at the time, it really seemed a lot to ask for children to carry the burden of desegregating the schools.
The late Senator Harry Reid recommended Rollinson for judgeship in 2000, and she was nominated by former President Bill Clinton and confirmed by the Senate in record time. So I can imagine that this was really a whirlwind experience for you just by how fast it was happening. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face in the Ninth Circuit, and what does your everyday workload look like?
Well, let me just say, when I came to Las Vegas, I was not aware that there had never been an African-American woman practicing in the legal community here. There was no African-American woman licensed to practice law in the state of Nevada. I had no idea of that when I came here. So another young lady, Monet Woods, and I were the first African-Americans to actually be licensed to practice law in the state of Nevada. So people were not accustomed to seeing African-American women in the courthouse. And I remember once I went to court and I was representing what is now known as UMC, the hospital. And I went in and I thought I did a really good job there. And we happened to have a visiting judge from one of the rural counties who was there. I finished my argument. He took the case under advisement. And then the law clerk called me and he said, "I just wanted to tell you what the judge said about you after you left." And I said, "Did he say I did a good job?" He said, "No." He said, "Who is that uppity colored girl was in here?" And that just floored me. And so, but that's been one of the biggest challenges is define expectations and overcoming the stereotypes. And it's just really interesting to me that we're in this period now where President Biden has promised to appoint an African American woman to the United States Supreme Court, which is long overdue. And there have already been people talking about if it's an African-American woman, she has to be unqualified. And that's just unfathomable to me. There's a professor at Georgetown who's been suspended for saying that very thing. And I just happen to know personally 2 of the women who are being considered, and I know 3 by reputation, they are all very well qualified. They happen to be African-American women, but they're all very qualified to sit on the Supreme Court. And so one of the things that's difficult for us as African Americans is overcoming the stereotypes that people have of us. I sit on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, as Shakayla mentioned, and we are the largest circuit court in the country. We cover the Western United States, 9 states and territories, including Hawaii, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, California, Arizona, Idaho, Montana. And so I have to travel a lot for my job. And oftentimes when I'm on a plane, I will be sitting by someone and I'm usually working. And that inevitably leads someone to ask me, what do I do? And when I tell them I'm a judge, they almost invariably say, "You don't look like a judge." And I ask them, what does a judge look like to you? And to me, implicit in that remark is the fact that an African American woman should not be a judge. They're really surprised. They often think I'm a teacher. Teacher is an honorable profession, but that is not my profession. And that's usually what they guess. And so I think the most difficult thing is overcoming the stereotypes that people have about what your capabilities are and what you deserve in your profession. I have to say my colleagues on the Ninth Circuit, for the most part, have been very receptive to me being on the court and have been very collegial. I think one of the things that I bring to the court that many of them have not lived through is the racism that's faced by us virtually on a daily basis. So I've been able to bring that perspective to my court. For instance, when we have voting right cases, it's not just an academic exercise to me. I remember the first time my parents were able to vote was in 1960. And the reason they couldn't vote was because, as I told you, we lived in a segregated community, and there was no place designated for African Americans to vote. Therefore, they could not vote. In 1960, after the Department of Justice came in and enforced desegregation of voting, my parents were able to vote. And it was a celebration for our community for African Americans to be able to freely vote. So I brought that experience with me onto the Ninth Circuit, and I was able to tell my colleagues, this is not academic, this is real. And I told them the story about my mother, who at the time was 85 years old, who went to vote at a precinct where she had been voting for 20 years and was told that she no longer could vote there. And when she asked them where was she supposed to go to vote, they said, "We don't know. You have to go to the election department and find out." The election department was 10 miles away. So she had to call my sister to drive her to the election department, find out where she was supposed to go, drive back 10 miles, and vote. A less determined person would just have given up. But my mother was determined to vote. The point is, this is voter suppression. And so when those kinds of strategies are employed, I'm able to tell my colleagues, this happens. This is real. We need to take this seriously. And so I think that's why it's so important to have different perspectives on the court, because you're able to bring those perspectives and perhaps educate your colleagues to the fact that these things really exist. Our workload on the Ninth Circuit is tremendous. We generally have between 12,000 and 15,000 cases a year that we adjudicate. So we have a very heavy caseload, and many people bring cases in the Ninth Circuit because the Ninth Circuit has a reputation of being fairly willing to stretch the boundaries of the law, shall we say. And so we get a lot of innovative cases, and I've really enjoyed being on the Ninth Circuit. I have reached the age where I am able to take senior status. I have not done so yet. When Senator Reid asked me to sit on the Ninth Circuit, he did it with a purpose. He wanted to diversify the District Court of Nevada, and he wanted to diversify the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And about a month before Senator Reid died, I called him and I talked to him, and I thanked him for his vision and for his willingness to go out on a limb to put me on the Ninth Circuit, because he did it with some opposition. And so I feel very strongly that his legacy demands that it continue, that there be his vision continue in my successor. And so I'm staying on the bench for now until I can be assured that Senator Reid's legacy that he started and that was so important to him does continue.
Thank you. A few familiar faces here. The Honorable Michael Douglas has been a leader in the courtroom, especially when it comes to specialty courts and helping low-income individuals with free legal assistance. Can you talk to us, Mr. Douglas, more about this initiative?
The initiative is important. That's what brought me here in the first place. I grew up in California, Los Angeles, law school, and Hastings in San Francisco. Went back to Pennsylvania to practice law in a private law firm with some friends. After being back there roughly a year, they wanted to transition to Washington, D.C., and the wife and I, my wife is here, who's been my partner and supported me all this time, we didn't really want to go to D.C. We just didn't see a reason for it. So it was to stay in Philadelphia, PA, come back west, and I'm in the law library and I see an article, legal services attorneys wanted any bar. And I said, I can do that. So I wrote a blind resume, a resume and sent it in, did a phone interview, and got hired. What I didn't realize at the time when I got hired, even though I had a cousin who was in Las Vegas, was working for one of the television stations, that there weren't but a handful of black attorneys, and that folks of color were having a difficulty passing the bar. So in 1982, we got here in July. I got admitted on a limited practice status to legal services, took the bar in 83. And at that time, 5 of us passed, 5 blacks. David Phillips, Denise Lightford, Michael Davidson, myself, 5. And we were the largest group that had ever passed the bar. Continue to work for legal services. I'm going to use the word mentor, because in a sense she was a mentor, Judge Rollinson. I told her I wanted to leave the legal services, looking to go to work for the DA's office. She said, you really want to do that? I said, sounds like a good idea. So next thing I know, I get a call from the DA's office. We understand you want to come to work for us. Part of that story, though, is that I showed up for the interview, and I said, oh, by the way, would you like my resume? They didn't even have my resume. They had her word. They offered me a position. I didn't take it because I was the only, at the time, licensed Nevada attorney at Legal Services, and they needed one licensed attorney in that office for the ones that were on limited admission. So I stayed another year. They gave me a second offer. I came back and I went to work, and we were co-workers and in the DA's office listening to our county commissioners and trying to get them in the gray area of the law so we could stand the litigation that was coming our way when they would do things that they wanted to do that weren't quite what they were supposed to do.
I can understand that.
But legal services, it was the beginning of access to justice for me, representing folks who needed representation. I remember having a client in my office during one of the recession periods here, and the man, it was like, Attorney Douglas, can you help me? Didn't care where I went to school, didn't care that I was black, but can you help me? I said, we'll give it a good shot. It told me how much power you as an attorney had for people that were at the end of their line. And sometimes they were just happy, even if they lost, that you spoke up for them. After I left Legal Services, I stayed involved with Legal Services in their statewide network, and then eventually when I got to district court representing, trying to get pro bono activity, and then eventually working with legal services providers in Northern Nevada, Southern Nevada, and rural Nevada, getting our private bar to take pro bono for free representation of people in Nevada. We have about a 16.4 population of poor people, people that make less than $12,888 a year, who can't afford representation. And they get beat up by everybody. They get beat up by the state, the county, the bill collectors, you name it, they get beat up. Unlawful detainers, just, it's horrible. We worked and worked and worked with Barbara Buckley from Legal Services here, providers in Northern Nevada, to get the state bar, the county bar involved in giving representation, along with increasing funding for the legal services providers to provide assistance, to give those folks a voice. Very prominent attorneys who make real stupid money have taken pro bono cases on predatory loans and evictions and other things and given these folks a voice. And they've stood up in the state legislature and asked for changes. Wasn't alone in this process, but it was a passion, and we kept pushing. And we told the attorneys when this really got moving, one promise: take one case, just take one case, help one person, then we'll leave you alone. That was a lie, but that's what we told them. Because we kept coming back to the ones who would take cases. And the funny thing is that you find that the people who are the busiest find time when they don't have time to take another case and to do the right thing to help people in need. So that's been a passion. I tried to push and pass on that passion to other people. And that's something I feel very good about. I was listening to Judge Rollinson talking about her experiences and things of that nature. Grew up in California and Los Angeles, went to predominantly black schools. Sometimes I had teachers who cared, and other times I had teachers who didn't care. You were just there. And I remember in undergraduate college needing a letter for recommendation from a professor, and he just looked at me and said no. Wasn't about the grade, just no. And I was taken aback. But that is the way it goes. I was raised, my father was a baby of 13, first to go to college in his family. And I was being stupid once in high school, and my mother just looked at me and said, "Boy, you ain't got no excuses. You need to get your act together." Judge Rollinson's story, legal services attorney, dressed up in three-piece suit, briefcase in hand, go to district court representing somebody, walk in the courtroom, one of the district court judges calls a case. I go to the bench, our table, other attorney goes with his client. The judge looks down and said, "Well, the side not being represented by counsel, judgment for the other side." And I kind of looked and said, "Excuse me, Your Honor." And the other attorney said, "Your Honor, he's the attorney." This was 1983. Las Vegas and Clark County was a very interesting place, still is. But I say that, and I'll say the other side of it. I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the bench, not only because people thought I might do a good job, but by two different governors. Governor Bob Miller, a Democrat, and Governor Kenny Gwinn, a Republican, to the Supreme Court. So things have changed, but they can still get better.
Thank you. In 2019, the UNLV Boyd School of Law created the Justice Michael L. Douglas Pre-Law Fellowship Program to introduce students from underrepresented communities to the rigors of law school and the benefits of legal education. These initiatives have been life-changing for students. Mr. Douglas, what has your interaction looked like with some of these students here?
Kind of go back to even before this program, and I'll give you the story about the program. There was a slide earlier, I guess the first slide on me, that showed Judge Williams, Judge Rollinson, in our younger states with hair, with black hair, and so on.
And I actually had a full head of hair.
Yeah, me too.
The association, the National Bar Association in Nevada, we came together because there were just a handful of us. Sometimes we said we were having a meeting on the corner and there'd be three of us talking to each other. We said one of the aims and one of the things we should be doing is trying to promote future attorneys for Las Vegas and Nevada. And the phrase that we used was getting the best and the brightest to come back home. So one of our purposes was to raise some money, a little bit of money, for scholarship to help those people who were had been accepted to law school, pay for their books, pay for part of the tuition. And one of our success stories in doing that, they got into law school, but we gave them a little bit of money, and it was very little, was Attorney Brian Scott.
Yep.
So, but for us, it was a beginning of bringing back the best and the brightest to Las Vegas to practice in the future. The program at the Boyd School of Law that bears my name, when I was on the Supreme Court, I was working with the then Dean of the law school, trying to get my colleagues and the Board of Bar Examiners to look at lowering the score just a little bit for the bar exam, because it seemed to be that minorities were having a problem getting licensed. My colleagues in the bar would not do that. Right, wrong, they still wouldn't do it. But nonetheless, we kept pushing. I came across an article from Duke University that talked about a special program they would run every summer to let young folks know that law school was possible. This is what law school was about. This is what you needed to do to get into law school. And mentally to prepare yourself. It was possible. I'm in my last year on the Supreme Court. I decided I'm going to retire. The dean comes back and says, we want to do this program and we want to name it in your honor. So we have a summer program. We bring some students in, a week-long program with the assistance of professors from UNLV, lawyers in our community. And for the first part of this program, one of the nice things, late Senator Harry Reid would also give an hour of his time to talk to these students about the political life. Didn't have to. He was not running for anything anymore. But he felt committed also that we needed to help level the playing field, to get that diversity. This is special. Those of our leaders are tomorrow. That picture was taken at one of our local high schools, and I'm in the background. For somehow, Brian Scott got out in front.
I don't know how I won to the front. But somehow,
And I think he was trying to block me out of the picture.
I had no clue how that happened.
But talking to these young folks about the possibility of going to law school. Some of them have never talked to a lawyer, which is good for them, but never talked to a lawyer before. So putting that seed, planting it, and even giving them the co-argument that you may not want to be a practicing a lawyer. Some of you want to be rock stars, athletes, business people. And I'd look at them and say, you better learn how to count your money. If you let somebody else do it, you may not have any. Law school might help you. Recently, and we have a kid here who was instrumental in working with Boyd to make sure this happened. One of the people who got admitted to Boyd was somebody who came out of that program. Her grades were good, and the recommendation letter that she wrote, not recommendation, but the letter about herself, talked about her experience that made her want to do this. So, reaching out and helping. The underlying story for all of us up here, you have Charlie Keller, but you had another gentleman, Del Guy, Judge Adler Del Guy. He was our mentor, good, bad, or indifferent. He was promoting us as attorneys to do the best we could do for our clients and to groom one of us to take his place or to become a judge or to become an outstanding attorney. So he put the spark in it for all of us to reach back. We, sitting here, stood on some very broad shoulders of some others. And it's our obligation to do what little we can to see the next generation. And that next generation is already here. And the next generation after that is in progress.
Thank you. Well, Judge Tim Williams, this actually wasn't your first career choice. Can you talk about your career path and some of the concerns that you had as it relates to diversity in the legal field?
And thank you. And it's a pleasure and honor to be here. And as I listen to my fellow members of the National Bar Association and their stories and journeys, I'll talk a little bit about mine. And I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And in the South Shore area, in fact, very much the same area Michelle Obama grew up in. And growing up on the south side of Chicago, I guess for some reason, community organizing becomes somewhat part of you, you know? And I think it does. And I don't mind telling you this. I mean, my first career choice wasn't to be a lawyer. I remember talking to my father, and I wanted to be actually an anthropologist, right? And I still remember that story. And after my first year of undergrad, I go home, and I said, Dad, I want to major in anthropology. He said, what's that? You know? And then he said, okay, well, just do me one favor before you decide that that's going to be your career choice. Go look at the Sunday paper, Chicago Tribune, and see what jobs they have in the paper for anthropologists. You know, I didn't major in anthropology. That's the best way to say that. But, you know, as far as becoming a lawyer, living in Chicago, I can remember this, and this is why role models are so important, right? And role models can be just a fleeting introduction, just an observation. And so I was downtown in Chicago. I think I was in the Daily Center doing something, right? And I was getting on the elevator. And I happened to get on the elevator at the same time James Montgomery. Does anybody remember James Montgomery? He was the city attorney in Chicago under Harold Washington, right? Great trial lawyer. And I remember he was getting on the elevator, and I happened to be right there. And someone walked up to him and said, "Counselor, how are you doing today?" And I just looked at that and I said, wow. I thought that was so cool. You know, I really did. And so I said, maybe I should go to law school, right? And so that's kind of how I made that choice. But, you know, we all have different journeys in life. And so I remember I graduated from law school and I was going to go back to Chicago. In fact, I passed the Illinois bar. And I don't think anybody knows this, but I was enrolled in a LLM program in taxation. Yeah, I was going to become a tax lawyer. And I actually finished my first year in taxation, right? And I only had one more year to go. And so it was, I think it was April 15th of 1985. And I have an older brother who happens to be a physician. And I was working for Chicago Title in downtown Chicago at the time. And my brother said, go with me out to Las Vegas, you know, and so on. And if you know anything about Chicago, in April, it's still winter, right? It really is. You know, overcast, rain, sleet. And we took a red eye out to Las Vegas. And I remember landing at the old McCarran Airport. And at the time, this was before McCarran 2000. And the planes would just land on the tarmac. You remember that time, right? They don't know. We didn't always have this big fancy airport, right? And so anyway, it lands, and I get off the plane. It's red eye, about 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock. I looked around, and I said, wow, not a cloud in the sky, right? And it was about 75 degrees. And I said to myself, wow, maybe forget that tax. I can always go back. I'm licensed. I only have one more year. And I came out and found a job in Las Vegas within a week. I mean, it was really just a much different town, right? Because you would walk up and down 4th Street, and they had all the law firms, and you could walk in, hand your resume, and you get called back. And that's kind of how it happened with me and how I got here. I will say one thing I feel very important, and it's important to me, and it really focuses on the National Bar Association. Because when I moved to Las Vegas, there weren't many African-American lawyers practicing law. There just weren't. But the members of the NBA made it for me so welcoming. They welcomed me to Las Vegas, and whatever support you need, we'll give that to you. My path was slightly different. in this regard because I didn't work in government. And, when it comes to job and job opportunities, many times those opportunities are reflected by who happens to say, I want to hire you, right? And so at the time, I was very, very fortunate to work for, my first job was as a law clerk, and they retained me as an associate, but I worked for a lawyer in town by the name of Neil Gallitz, who was very well known and respected, and he handled a lot of the complex civil litigation cases back in the 90s, the late 80s, like the MGM fire cases, the Houghton fire cases, the Pepcon explosion cases, and so on. And so my path was a little bit different. It just was. But I tell you what, you learn a lot working for a good civil litigation firm. You just do. And so that's my path as far as career choices. A lot of serendipity. There's no question about it. I had no goal as far as what I wanted to do other than I wanted to do very well at what I was doing at that time. From a practice perspective, I've always felt, and for me this is really, really important, and this might be a little bit of that community organizer in me, but I felt it was very important to kind of give back to the community. And what I mean by that is this. I'm not saying you join organizations and you get involved in that regard because we're busy. But I think it's important always, at that time, I felt it was important to give, if you didn't have time, you can give money. I don't mind saying that. I would try to support Little League baseball teams, youth basketball. One of my favorite programs I would contribute to would be the Henderson Heat. Wesley Reed, he passed away a little while ago, and he was a big supporter of women's basketball from a youth perspective. And I felt that's just really, really important to give back because you never know from a role model perspective who you can impact just by meeting them. You just don't know, and you don't know your impact, and it does have an impact. And one thing I've always felt, too, is important in this regard, you can give back with your time, too. And I remember this probably might have been the early 90s, and I think Justice Douglas and Judge Rollinson might remember this, but I was really heavily involved at that time with the NAACP Legal Redress Committee, and which was really... we would just do it, and I don't mind telling you who participated. I had Cuthbert Mack. He was one of our participants, and he would participate. And we also had Judge William Henderson, who's a family court judge. And the reason why I bring that up, and this is what we would do, is really this simple. We couldn't take the cases, but we would meet at the NAACP office 2 Thursdays a month. And at the time, it was Reverend Jesse Scott, who was, I guess, the president of the NAACP at the time. And what we would do, we just kind of set it up this way, where people could come in, fill out their little informational, and have a chance to sit down and talk to a lawyer, right? I mean, we weren't taking their cases, but they might have a problem regarding unemployment, and we'd let them know how that process worked. They might have an EEOC problem, a discrimination problem, and they really and truly needed someone to talk to. But here's my point, and I think this is one of the things that we would do. Each Thursday, every other week, we'd have about 20 people there. And we started at 7 o'clock, we'd be done about 10 o'clock every night. And we did that for about 4 years, and we calculated maybe we served 1,000 people, give or take. But that's just a way of giving back, right? And see, I become a trial judge, and understand this, I'm a civil judge. I don't mind saying that. I'm very proud of being a civil judge. And I handle complex civil litigation. That's what I do. But once again, going back to being a community organizer, and this is something I think I've done, I don't think it's ever been done before. But I would, at the time I was working with Dr. Matthews, and Dr. Matthews was the principal at Canyon Springs High School. Does anybody remember that? Remember him? Right? And Canyon Springs High School actually has a courtroom, right? And so you know what I would do? We didn't have moot court or anything like that. I actually took the entire district court to Canyon Springs High School. And we took an actual jury, the bailiff, the court reporter, the parties, and we'd actually try a one-day jury trial at Canyon Springs High School, right? And we do it once a year, and it took a lot to get everyone there. But I wanted to do that for two reasons. And reason number one, Canyon Springs High School mirrored the type of high school I went to. And so I kind of adopted Canyon Springs. But just as important, it's like we've all talked about, it's important for young people to have exposure. And it really and truly is, because I remember when I was doing that, the young people at Canyon Springs High School were so proud of that little program we had because they realized there was no other school in the country that had an actual jury trial that would come to their campus every year, right? Now, there was one benefit to going to Canyon Springs High School. And I still remember this. I think he was a student there, and he was, I think, a sophomore or junior at the time. And he walked up to me, he says, "Judge, you know, I think I want to be a lawyer," right? And I said, "Well," they said, "this is something you can do. And I tell you what, if you go to law school and you become, and you get in, and after you pass the bar, if you want a clerk, I will hire you as my law clerk," right? And so about, it must have been 6, 7, 8 years later, I get a call. And it's J.T. Washington. And he says, "Judge, remember that promise you gave me?" And, you know, a promise is a promise, right? And J.T. Washington became one of my law clerks. And he graduated from Canyon Springs, went to UNLV, went to Boyd, got his law degree, passed the bar. And you know what? He was a fantastic law clerk. He really was. And he's doing a wonderful job as a lawyer. But, you know, I think you go out and you want to do those types of things because, like everyone has indicated, it's all about exposure, right? It's like when I I didn't meet, but when I saw Jim Montgomery in the elevator. And I think it was, "Counselor, how are you doing?" I just thought that was just a great thing, right? And you don't know, but it's all about exposure. But that's kind of my journey. That's my career path. I'm a trial judge, civil cases, complex business court, construction defect. That's what I do.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. In reality, African Americans only make up a handful of judges and legal professionals in Nevada courtrooms. Several studies have been conducted on the legal industry's lack of diversity, including less privileged students not being able to afford law school, inner city schools not having the resources to support young people in those communities, and minority lawyers seeing a lack of opportunity and leaving the profession after graduation. So I'd like to hear from each of you on this topic of how we can build a more diverse legal system moving forward. And anyone can chime in. Mr. Scott, though, I know that you, at the State Bar, they recently conducted a demographic survey that shows an increase in the number of African Americans entering the legal profession.
Thank you, Shakayla. When I was the chair of the State Bar's Diversity Committee, I was surprised by the fact that we didn't know how diverse we were as a bar. And so we tracked age, gender, where you practiced, what you practiced, but we didn't track ethnicity. And as the diversity chair, I was kind of struggling to find out exactly how diverse we were. So I talked the Board of Governors. I was on the Board of Governors for 13 years before I became the president of the State Bar in 2016-17. And they were very receptive to kind of determining exactly how diverse we were as a bar. So what we did is I had to write a letter because every time you want to ask for ethnic information, people always have a thing, they think that it's for an ill intent. And so I wrote a letter as diversity chair indicating that we wanted to take a look and see how diverse we were as a bar so that we could get a baseline to determine exactly if we were going to do diversity efforts, if they were succeeding. So they were very supportive of my efforts, and we started putting a voluntary box on your renewal slips when you renewed your state bar dues. You could identify what ethnicity you were. At first, we got some kickbacks from people just not wanting to do it at all, but they still are doing it to this day. And I'm happy to report out of the 9,500 active attorneys in practicing in Nevada, as of 2021, 6,908 of those attorneys identified their ethnicity. And so it's funny, when Justice Douglas was talking about the National Bar Scholarship, I was fortunate enough, thanks to my mentors here, to be able to be a recipient of that scholarship in 1988 through 1991 when I graduated from law school. And it was interesting to see that when Justice Douglas in 1988, when he was president of the LVMBA, wrote to me for the first time saying that I had gotten the $600 scholarship. And trust me, I appreciated that. I grew up in North Las Vegas. I had zero money. So the $600 to me was a big deal. And so when he wrote to me, he enclosed a letter, a roster of the attorneys in the LVMBA. There were 28 names on that list, and that was in 1988. Today, there are now 189 African-American attorneys practicing, at least that identify themselves as African-American, of the 9,500. I know it doesn't seem a lot, but that's 2.73% of the attorneys. And I think that it goes back to what all of them have said up here, is that to get those numbers to increase, we have to have exposure, or we have to be mentors to those persons or those students who want to practice law and who haven't had that exposure. I never had any exposure to lawyers when I was growing up, but just through happenstance, I happened to go through the small claims court process during my first year of college when someone sold me a car that was a lemon. That kind of instilled in me that desire to go to law school. And I think that it takes that mentorship and that exposure to kids early on in the process to get them to want to practice law.
Kayla, can I just say that one of the things that, to me, I get the most satisfaction from is positioning young lawyers to succeed in the legal profession. And the court I sit on is one step below the United States Supreme Court. And I have 4 clerks, and those clerkships are highly desired. And they are desired because some of the biggest law firms in the country only hire from people who have been law clerks at the appellate level. Academia, if you want to be a law professor, you almost have to have a clerkship at the appellate level. So these clerkships are very competitive. And unfortunately, many of my colleagues limit the clerkships to people who have gone to elite universities, the Harvards, the Yales, the Stanford. And I have been diligent about making sure that those, I think there are talented law students at every law school. And I have a policy, if you graduate number 1 in your class, I don't care what law school you went to, you get an interview with me, because I think that if you've taken the time and put in the work to be number 1 in your class, you deserve the opportunity to get one of those clerkships. And I've tried to convince my colleagues that there are good law students everywhere. I hire from all law schools, including Boyd Law School, Hastings, Howard, UCLA. I hired from some law schools I had never heard from before, and I was like, let me see if this law school is accredited. But it was.
You see what happens when you let a federal judge from McGeorge talk.
Right.
She just puts everybody else down.
I went to McGeorge, and I think I'm an excellent judge. People from schools, people go to law schools for all different types of reasons. I went to McGeorge Law School sight unseen because my husband was in the military. That's where he got stationed, and that's where I had to go to law school. And I talked to one young man who I hired, and he was from Florida Nova Law Schools. I had never heard of it. I said, is your law school accredited? And I looked it up and it was accredited. And I said, why did you go to that law school? He said, because they give veterans full scholarships. Makes sense to me. So I want to make sure that this opportunity is given to as a wide variety of people as possible. And I think that's one of the reasons that Senator Reid felt so strongly about having someone in this position who is not an elitist, who is an everyday person who recognizes that there is talent at every level, that you can find law clerks. I mean, some of the law clerks who have left me have gone to law firms and gotten $100,000 signing bonuses. So it's really a big deal to have an appellate clerkship. And I am committed to making sure that those clerkships go to diverse candidates. And I'm hoping that I can convince more of my colleagues to take that same approach. Also, you get a diversity of opinion. If all of the people have gone to an Ivy League school, all you get is the Ivy League point of view. But if you have people from a wide range of schools, HBCUs, schools from the South, schools from the North, schools from the West, Midwest, then you get the opportunity to have conversations that are meaningful, and you have input from various viewpoints that can inform you to make better decisions. So that's kind of my spiel in terms of diversity and how I think we as judges can help that process.
Each judge has a slightly different philosophy on clerks. But much like Johnnie, it's important to give folks opportunity. One of the things I saw when I got here was minorities and women unless they were from a family that knew the judge's family, were not getting hired. So my interns and my clerks, I'd read the resumes. I really didn't give a damn about you being number one in your class. I didn't give a damn about you being in law review. I read your resume because I wanted to know who you were. Was there worth? I can't teach you drive. I can nurture you if you have that. And I'd look for people, in some cases, who were working full-time and going to school full-time, undergrad, working part-time, going to law school part-time, and still had good grades. To come in, and as Judge Rollinson said, at the end of the day, I clerked at the Supreme Court. I clerked at the District Court, which got them a job. And can I get one of those signing bonuses?
I want one myself. I want a referring bonus.
But the importance, and you have to have people in positions who can provide those opportunities. Brian Scott's his journey. He's now in the position to open the door to give back. We can't do it for them. We can't teach them to work hard if they don't want to work hard, but we can give them the opportunity. We have a number of African Americans who have very prominent law firms in this town. We also have one that has either, depending on who you talk to, either the biggest or second biggest law firm in the state, Aaron Ford, our Attorney General.
True.
And we're going to have another one who leads a big law firm, hopefully very soon, in the U.S. Attorney's Office here. They provide opportunities, that conduit, to create the next generation of role models for the young kids to look up, who will go back and bring people who came out of their neighborhoods. Judge Williams was talking about his experience about being a lawyer. Likewise, I was not interested in being a lawyer. I wanted to be a teacher and coach like my dad. But my first kind of real interaction with the law system and a judge, dumb young man, got married, got unmarried. I'm in divorce court. In Los Angeles, they bring you in and they say, sir, before we make this final, you have to go to counseling. And being a dumb, flippant young man, I looked at the judge, I don't want to go to counseling. Judge looked down at me and said, young man, you're going to counseling or you're going to jail. Got my attention about what they could do in the law. Still didn't want to be a lawyer. Still didn't want to be a judge. I didn't want to become a judge when I became a lawyer. But opportunity And sometimes you understand you have to be part of the change. It wasn't about the money. It was about the opportunity. And there's nothing wrong with making money, because some of my best friends make good money and they still reach back and help others.
And I just want to echo some of the comments that were made by Judge Rollinson and also Justice Douglas, because I have the same view they do as far as opportunities are concerned. And understand what I do now, I'm in business court, and they consider Nevada the Delaware of the West, right? And we handle complex business matters here in Clark County. And so I have a slightly different, and so my law clerks, I wish I had 4, Judge Robinson. I only got 1, plus a couple externs. But anyway, and they will tell you to a person, and we've had a very diverse group of law clerks over the years. But when they come in, my first question for them is this: where did you go to high school? Right? And there's a reason for that. I mean, I went to South Shore High School in Chicago on the south side, public high school, inner city high school. And so I understand some of the difficult road a person might have and some of the obstacles they might have to overcome to become a lawyer if you graduated from South Shore High School. And so I can just tell you this: I think I've had 20 law clerks, and out of the 20, 18 have been public school grads here in Las Vegas. Because that's the first thing I look for. And then I'll look at other things which you did in law school. And there's a reason for that, because, and I think Judge Rollinson or Justice Douglas might have talked about this, but they don't have any advantages, right? I had one young lady, Susanna Santana, and she went to Las Vegas High School. And we were talking, and I was interviewing her, and she said, "Judge, I don't even know how you become a lawyer, but that's what I wanted to do." And I had no role models whatsoever, and somehow she made it, right? But then when they come and they apply, they're not the son or daughter of a doctor, or the son and daughter of a lawyer, or a judge, or those types of things, right? No, you went to Las Vegas High, El Dorado, Cheyenne, and I've had them from all those different high schools.
Rancho.
Well, I have a rancho too. I do, but and that's my point, you know. And so that's what I look at, and it's very much in the same vein as both Justice Douglas and Judge Rollinson, because I look at it from this perspective. If you graduated from Rancho and you had that difficult journey, you make it to law school and you pass the bar, I'd like to talk to you. So, Mr. Scott, you're looking for a new job?
Depends on the council. We'll see.
You're going to retire, right?
They call you. Right.
Well, we have seen an increased focus on issues related to racial inequality over the past recent years. We had an interesting talk last week about the importance of creating a just and fair criminal justice system, but a civil justice system too. Mr. Williams, you mentioned the importance of a diverse jury, and can you talk more about that?
And I think this is something that's so overlooked from a litigation perspective. And you know, we talk about all our different rights, we know, and they're set forth in the Constitution. But if you take a look at the preamble, and it's really important to really focus on that, because the first real right raised in the preamble, which is our mission statement to our Constitution, is justice, right? And this is how important that is, because, you know, we have a justice system that is so different than any other in the country, because at the end of the day, and this is what I tell all jurors when they come in, when we have the jury selection process, because I actually feel that jurors don't understand this, because once you are sworn in and impaneled as a member of a jury in Clark County, you become part of the justice system, right? As a trial judge, I'm going to tell you what the law is. I'm going to instruct you on that. But at the end of the day, the ultimate decision is made by we the people. And so I think we take our right to serve on a jury for granted. We overlook that right. It's an important right as there is the right to vote. if you look at the right to a jury trial, it's mentioned more times in the U.S. Constitution than any other right. It's there, right? And so that's my point. And I think as African Americans, and some of us, we overlook the true power of a jury. Juries are powerful, right? I had one case about 10 years ago where a jury came back with a verdict of over $500 million.
Wow.
Think about that for a second. 8-panel jury, right? It just so happens that on the jury, 4 members of that panel were African American, right? And that's kind of my point. If you want to participate in the process and make change, the 2 top ways I can see you can do that is this. Go vote, and when you get that summons in the mail, as it pertains to jury service, you take advantage of that and go down and serve the citizens of Clark County. Because juries are powerful, and from time to time, their decisions will change practices nationwide in civil cases. They will. That case I told you about, that changed injection practices across the entire country. That one case. And it was a jury. And people are willing to serve. And so we can't overlook that right to serve and make a difference.
Thank you.
You know, if I could, you know, Shakayla, part of my office, I oversee 22 attorneys. I became city attorney a year and a half ago. I've been in the office for 25 years. I was the only attorney of color in the city attorney's office when I took over a year and a half ago. And part of my office deals with prosecution. We prosecute misdemeanor offenses, DUIs, domestic violence, drug offenses, code enforcement issues, things of that nature. But I had not one prosecutor who was a person of color. We had women, but no women in the civil division. But we had women in the criminal division, but no people of color. And so one thing, and I tell this story to the council, that I was due to retire last year. And I chose to put off my retirement so that I could serve as city attorney. And trust me, I had the app on my phone with the beach scene, and I had it counting down, and I was ready to go. But when this opportunity came, I saw it as an opportunity for me to make some changes. And one of the changes I wanted to make is to diversify the office. Because I think that when you get that different perspective, especially we prosecute 75,000 cases a year misdemeanor cases. And without that diversity, I don't think that we were seeing the justice that we should have been doing all along. And so my goal is to, before I leave that office, is to set it up such that it is a more diverse office. Since I took over a year and a half ago, there were no women in civil. I now have, I've recruited 2 African-American women, one from the city of Henderson, who I stole her from the city of Henderson, who does our HR work. Took one from Murchison and Cummings, who's now doing our transactional work and litigation work. I transferred one of my civil female deputies from criminal to civil, and I hired a woman who was one of our UNLV externs, Imani Dixon, to be in the criminal division, who's African American female. I've had 48 externs in probably the last 12, 14 years. Very diverse group. Some of them have now been lawyers for 10 or 12 years. And so I think it's important and incumbent upon me as a person, like Justice Douglas said, who's in a position to be able to diversify this office. I felt it was my obligation at this point to stay and do everything I could to diversify the office, to put it on the right track so that we could then do justice. And I think that comes with the diversity, not only men and women, but African Americans, Caucasians, Asian, the works. And so that's my goal. The next city attorney may not see it that way, but at least I've started us, I think, on the right path. So.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Rollinson made headlines back in November in regards to a recent case about environmental racism. Can you briefly just tell the audience about that case?
Yes, I can't talk about the details of that case too much because it's not final yet. But suffice it to say that I think it's important for judges of color to point out racial injustice whenever and wherever they see it. And it's uncomfortable sometimes for people to be confronted with the reality of racism. And this particular case brought that to the forefront. I had no idea that the case was going to get the publicity it does, because generally environmental cases involve a lot of science and a lot of reports, and nobody reads our opinions on it. So I was really surprised when a reporter called and wanted to talk with me about the case. But the reason the reporter wanted to talk with me about the case is because it's so unusual for a judge to point out environmental racism. It's been reported in a number of scientific journals, and a number of environmentalists have been talking about it, but it does not show up in the cases. And so I thought it was important for me to bring that issue to the forefront. The case is called Center for Community Action versus Federal Aviation Administration. It's about an Amazon hangar that was put in San Bernardino County, one of the most polluted counties in the country, that happens to be mostly brown and black people living there. And so if you read my dissent in that case, you'll know what I think about the whole process. I would love to talk about it in more detail, but as I said, it's still not finalized, so I can't talk about it in detail.
Mr. Douglas, let's end on you. For some people who may be watching on live stream or in the audience and may be wanting to pursue a career in the legal field, what kind of advice would you give them during this tumultuous time?
Do it.
Just do it.
Major in anthropology. Right.
If that's what you want to do, you can't wait till you're a senior in college. It's a little late. You have to start in high school. You have to get good grades. It's helpful to get in a good college. And it's even more important to have good grades while you're in college, which I didn't have. But the question is, are you willing to dedicate yourself to do the best you can do every day? Supreme Court Justice is retiring and said, just do the job. Humble words, but so important. You have to bring a passion. You have to bring a conviction. The most rewarding thing, when it's all said and done, is helping one person when the odds were stacked against you. And work at it. Don't give up. Don't let people predetermine your outcome by telling you you can't do it. You have to, at some point, become your own mentor. I can do this, even if you have no idea what the hell you're doing. You have to believe in yourself, no matter how hard it is, how bad it is. You talked about juries. A combination of two things. Diversity of the bench. When people walk in the courtroom and they see someone different sitting up on that bench with that black robe, it's an enlightenment to them. When we get to sit at the table when you're on appellate courts, district court, criminal, civil, and I did both, did business court. The right half of your brain and left half of your brain, they argue with each other, but that's it. It's just you. You sit on a 3-judge panel or you sit in a 7-member court or more, you have the opportunity to convince other people. And sometimes you have the ability to look at other people and say, what the hell are you talking about? I'm sitting here. I come from a different background. That's not true. And you can raise issues that are uncomfortable, or sometimes, to be quite honest, those issues do not get raised because you're sitting there. Prevalent issue still today in criminal cases is Batson. Just striking jurors merely because of their color, trying to find fancy ways to get rid of them. In the civil cases, at least now there's a contest. The civil attorneys understand that it's important to have a diverse jury for the award or the defense, bringing those diverse backgrounds to the table, being involved. What is the worth of a black life versus a white life, an Asian life versus Hispanic life? If none of those people are on the jury, who speaks for them? Who has any idea? What you ask jurors to do is listen, weigh the facts, follow the instructions as to the law. The problem is we all walk in with our own prejudices and biases, and that gets neutralized by having different people with different ideas in the room, so you get a mixed discussion. It's not a one-size-fits-all because everybody in the room looks alike. And we still have to fight because judges will look the other way when jurors get stricken. And they know the challenge is not a good challenge. Appellate courts get it, and sometimes the courage of the convictions, they look and realize this should not be happening. And it makes a difference. We as a group, minorities as a group, poor people as a group, are now in court more often for civil damages or for environmental impacts to the community. So they should have people who look like them, because I would ask jurors, would you like someone in the jury box making a decision to look like you, deciding your fate? Same in criminal, same in civil. Different stakes, but nonetheless, the same importance. And to become a lawyer, understand one person can make a difference. Some years ago, the National Bar, one of our scholarship dinners, we had a young man come out to be our guest speaker. He's very famous now. Southern Poverty Law Center. Brian Stevenson. He told a little story about how tired he got fighting for those on death row, criminal, and everything else. And he said, a little old lady looked at him and said, son, I'm 80 some odd years ago. I get tired, but you just get up and one step at a time. And that's what you tell people. Figure out another way to do it. You want to go to law school? The first thing is get admitted. That was my goal, get admitted. The second goal, I want to graduate. Third goal, I want to pass the bar. Everything after that is gravy. But you have to want it.
Shakayla, could I just ask? I just have to say one thing. Justice Douglas talking about going to a good school. And in people's mind, good school has different meanings. My kids will tell you that my motto is the best education is a free education. And so, a lot of parents have mortgaged their homes. People have borrowed thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to go to a particular school, and then they end up not being able to have a life because they have all of this debt hanging over them. And so my advice to young people is go to the school that gives you the money. And I went to an HBCU, a historically black college and university. Did very well there, got a full academic scholarship to law school. So good is relative. Whatever school you're able to go to learn what you need to learn without a lot of debt, that's my advice. That's a good school for you.
The other part of that is go to school to learn, don't go to school for the party.
Right.
We have run out of time, but thank you all so much for being here in this remarkable panel. This is by far one of my favorite programs here at the Mob Museum. So a special thank you to our panelists for sharing their wisdom. Thank you to NV Energy for sponsoring this program and making it free for the community. And thank you to the Clark County Black Caucus for all of their work all of the time. Have a great night. Thank you.